Lincoln's Cooper Union Speech, Part 2, a close reading by Stacy Hoflick. So Abraham Lincoln finishes this first part of his speech, the majority of his speech, with this sort of thunderous rhetorical moment where he's accusing Stephen Douglas of misrepresenting the history as he sees it after having spent an hour proving the facts of the history as he sees it. And in this moment, there's an abrupt switch of tone and an abrupt switch of audience. So he changes and turns to speak directly to what he says are the Southern people. And his tone, again, compared to the way he just ended this thunderous moment in railing against Stephen Douglas, his tone changes completely in this moment. And he says to the Southern people, "You consider yourselves a reasonable and a just people, and I consider that in the general qualities of reason and justice, you are not inferior to any other people. Still, when you speak of us Republicans, you do so only to denounce us as reptiles, or at the best, as no better than outlaws." And then he urges, "Bring forward your charges, and then be patient long enough to hear us deny or justify." So he says to the Southern people, you're reasonable and you're just. For some reason, you seem to really hate us. If you really hate us, then tell us why you hate us. Well, unfortunately, there's no Southerner standing there on stage with him, so Abraham Lincoln then assumes the role of a Southerner and brings forward what he imagines would be the charges that a Southerner would levy against the Republicans and Abraham Lincoln. And so he lists these charges and proceeds to refute these charges one at a time. The first charge is sectionalism. The second charge is radicalism, and he argues that he's in fact quite conservative. The Republicans are so conservative that they still believe everything that the Founding Fathers believed. And then the third piece, and this is the part I really want to focus on here, is the charge that the Southern people are accusing the Republicans of stirring up insurrections, of trying to get up slave insurrections and rebellions. And I'm focusing on this charge because this is the short piece of the speech that I think those of you who are working with younger students, I teach fourth grade, I work with fourth graders, and those of you who are specifically in the state of Virginia could really focus on just this piece of the speech if you can't use the whole speech together. So at this moment, he says, "You charge that we stir up insurrections among your slaves. We deny it. What is your proof? Harper's Ferry, John Brown. John Brown was no Republican, and you have failed to implicate a single Republican in his Harper's Ferry enterprise. If any member of our party is guilty in that matter, you know it or you do not know it. If you do know it, you are inexcusable for not designating the man and proving the fact. If you do not know it, you are inexcusable for asserting it, and especially for persisting in the assertion after you have tried and failed to make the proof. You need not to be told that persisting in a charge which one does not know to be true is simply malicious slander." So he's back. This sort of angry man is back, and he's saying, you're charging us with these insurrections. John Brown's obviously not a Republican. We never supported it. Where is your proof that we supported it? If you have proof that we supported it, then bring it on. And if you don't have proof that we supported it, then this is malicious slander that you keep saying it, and you're just saying it to sway the elections. It's not appropriate. He goes on to specifically talk about another insurrection. He addresses the Nat Turner. He talks about Southampton, Virginia, and he talks about Nat Turner's rebellion. And the interesting point that he makes about Nat Turner's uprising, which happened in 1831 in Southampton, Virginia, is Nat Turner's insurrection happened in 1831. The Republican Party didn't even exist until the 1850s. So Lincoln says to the Southern people, "Slave insurrections are no more common now than they were before the Republican Party was organized. What induced the Southampton insurrection 28 years ago, in which at least 3 times as many lives were lost as at Harper's Ferry? You can scarcely stretch your very elastic fancy to the conclusion that Southampton was got up by black republicanism." So he's saying you can't blame that on us. We didn't exist. It's not our fault. And there are no more slave insurrections now than there were 30 years ago. So how can you accuse us of raising slave insurrections, whether it's our doctrines that are raising slave insurrections or whether we are literally trying to do that? So, and then to close, after taking each one of these charges and denying each one of these charges, again, he's ending this moment, this second part of the speech, in this really thunderous sort of accusatory tone. He says, again, he's speaking directly to the Southern people. He says, You will break up the Union rather than submit to a denial of your constitutional rights. When you make these declarations, you have specific, well-understood allusion to an assumed constitutional right of yours to take the slaves into the federal territories and hold them there as property. But no such right is specifically written in the Constitution. That instrument is literally silent about any such right. We, on the contrary, deny that such a right has any existence in the Constitution, even by implication. Your purpose, then, plainly stated, is that you will destroy the government unless you be allowed to construe and enforce the Constitution as you please on all points in dispute between you and us. You will rule or ruin in all events. I mean, to me, it sounds like he's calling them tyrants, or he's calling them spoiled children. He's saying to them, rule or ruin. You are imagining constitutional rights, and you're imagining these constitutional rights because what you're saying is your right is not actually stated anywhere in the Constitution. And if you don't get your way, you're going to stomp out. You're going to leave. You're going to do whatever you want to do because you're unhappy. And it sounds very angry and very much like he's tut-tutting them for being so immature and irrational. This is a huge contrast to the way he started this portion of the speech. Remember, the very beginning of this second section of the speech, he talks about the Southern people being reasonable and just. It doesn't sound like he thinks they're reasonable and just when he's ending his section talking to the Southern people by saying that they will rule or ruin in all events. That's the end of this second section.